We're going to begin with the news. It's tough news on the weather front with a huge storm just barreling across the Midwest. Blizzard conditions across hundreds of miles, including what you see here in Nebraska, where tens of thousands have lost power. High winds from the storm helped spread new wildfires yesterday. Meanwhile, in Texas, Oklahoma, and Arkansas as well. And outside of Chicago, where the winds were strong enough to uproot trees. And that is where we find Nicole Valdez this morning. She's in Highland, Indiana. Nicole, good morning. What do you see there?
Well, Tony, all that snow you talked about now moving over to the Midwest. We are here in Indiana, where we saw those severe thunderstorms roll through, cause quite a mess, including knocking this tree down on top of a family's home here. That all happened yesterday evening, and the storm caused an onslaught of nasty weather all across the Midwest.
Intense snow, whipping winds, severe thunderstorms, and new wildfires, all part of one colossal storm. In northwestern Indiana, just outside Chicago, severe thunderstorms blasted through neighborhoods, taking down power poles and toppling trees onto homes.
Went from 0 to 100 real quick outside.
Jessica Ramirez lives in Highland, where the National Weather Service warned of winds up to 70 miles an hour around 5:30 yesterday afternoon. The fierce winds raised her mother Rosie's car while she was in it.
And all of a sudden I feel my car lifting up in the air and I'm screaming to my husband.
The same massive storm brought blizzard conditions across parts of 6 states from Colorado to Wisconsin. In Omaha, Nebraska, winds gusted up to 75 miles an hour, creating whiteouts and near zero visibility, leaving cars stranded on the side of the highway.
Pretty scary. I've been driving 24 years, and that's the first I ever thought I was going to actually roll over.
In Lincoln, the winter storm knocked out power to thousands of people and dumped up to 15 inches in northern Iowa. In the south, high winds spread new wildfires like this one west of Tulsa, Oklahoma. And a fire north of Houston has burnt 2,000 acres, forcing evacuations in parts of San Jacinto County.
And right now it's in God's hands. There ain't nothing you can do about it but pray. Pray that your house stays okay.
And fortunately, Jessica and her mom, Rosie, they are doing okay after those terrifying moments yesterday. Now, really, it's been a rather roller coaster, if you will, guys. We had those severe storms yesterday. Now temperatures down into the 30s, and you can see the snow piling up on the damage behind me. Gail.
At the national level, President Trump is expected to sign an executive order today that will dismantle the Department of Education. But as Rena Roy reports, this technicality can't happen without congressional approval.
This move is facing widespread criticism, with education advocates warning it will have a profoundly negative impact on students across the country.
Protests across the country, with President Trump expected to sign an executive order to shut down the U.S. Department of Education. The order will direct his education secretary to take all necessary steps to facilitate the closure of the Department of Education and return education authority to the states. This move comes after the Trump administration already gutted the agency, cutting nearly half of its employees last week. Most funding for public schools is already at the state and local level, but the department oversees funding to help low-income students and students with disabilities, enforces civil rights laws to prevent discrimination in schools, schools and handles the process for students applying for college financial aid. The administration has promised none of those programs will be impacted. Sources say they're exploring how to move some of the Education Department's key programs to other agencies.
But critics are sounding the alarm. Without federal oversight, many are worried students, especially those with special needs or from low-income families, will pay the price.
What we find is when we give block grants to states, a lot of times that hurts students in need, that hurts brown and black children, and that gives states an opportunity to leave students out.
Parents also concerned what it will mean for their children, like Angela Barbie, who says her son, who has autism, is thriving because of funding from the Department of Education.
If those services are cut, it's not just his academic future at risk, it's his emotional well-being. It's his sense of self-worth. If he doesn't get the help he needs, my son doesn't just fall behind in his studies, he falls behind in life.
And now it's unclear if the department will actually be shuttered. Congress has to pass legislation to abolish the agency it created. Rina Roy.
The Italian Coast Guard recovered 6 bodies and was searching for up to 40 migrants after a rubber dinghy that departed from Tunisia sank in the central Mediterranean, the UN Refugee Agency said Wednesday. Another 10 people, including 4 women, were rescued Tuesday.
UNHCR is assisting right now the survivors, but UNHCR urges states to join forces to strengthen search and rescue mechanisms at sea and promote wider access to safe and regular channels in the European Union.
Survivors said some 56 people were in the dinghy when it departed from the Tunisian port of Sfax on Monday. The boat started to deflate a few hours later. The people on board were from Cameroon, Ivory Coast, Guinea and Mali, the UNHCR said. The survivors were taken to Italy's southernmost island of Lampedusa.
At the National Assembly, proceedings in the Senate started at a slow pace, with the chamber's leadership engaging in discussions before the day's business officially commenced. Top on the list was President Tinubu's request to ratify a state of emergency in Rivers State. Tijesu Adoye has more.
The motion listed as the first item on the Senate's other paper was expected to take center stage. However, the leadership decided to defer the matter until 3 p.m., opting to first consider other legislative items. The Senate cited Order 1B of its standing rules, which grants them the authority to regulate their own proceedings.
I move the motion pursuant to Order 1B of our rules, and if that is seconded and carried, that what is listed as the second order be now deemed to be the first order of the day. I so move, Mr. President.
According to Section 305 of the 1999 Constitution, as amended, the National Assembly has a 48-hour window to either approve or reject a presidential proclamation of a state of emergency when in session. If no resolution is reached with a 2/3 majority, the proclamation will be voided. The President has already transmitted official copies of the Gazette containing details of the emergency to the Presidents of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of Representatives. This puts the responsibility squarely on the National Assembly to either validate or reject the decision, a matter that has drawn intense scrutiny from lawmakers and Nigerians alike. However, in a surprising turn of events, the leader of the Senate later stepped down all items on the day's order paper, choosing instead to adjourn proceedings to the next legislative day. This means that the ratification of the state of emergency in Rivers State is now on hold, at least for now.
The Senate is a democratic institution, and the Senate has given room for more members who is not aware of this yesterday but got to know about it today to be able to come tomorrow and hear their views. Democracy is about numbers, it's about participation. So what we are saying is that we can adjourn it tomorrow in order to give room for more people to come. We formed quorum today. 68 people sign the register.
With political tensions already high in Rivers State, these delays only add to the uncertainty surrounding the situation. The Senate is now expected to reconvene and reach a final decision in its next legislative session, a decision that could significantly shape the political landscape in the state. As Nigerians watch closely, the big question remains, will the National Assembly uphold the state of emergency in Rivers State, or will it challenge the president's decision? These are certainly interesting times, and a decision reached will have far-reaching implications. Tejas Suadewi, TVC News, Abuja.
Residents of Port-au-Prince in Haiti's capital protested on Tuesday seeking protection against gang violence. Armed with machetes and stones, the protesters attempted to reach the Prime Minister's office but were held back by police using tear gas. We will not accept that the state is colluding with gangs to sell the country. This is the only Haiti we have. This flag is our flag. They will not cast us out. They have no right to deport us from our country. We will not accept that. The protesters claim that they have been hearing threats of a gang invasion in their neighborhoods of Canap Vert for days and made several appeals for police protection. On Wednesday, they took matters into their own hands. They armed themselves with knives and machetes, blocking roads leading to the Canap Vert with trees and burning tires. We have nowhere to go, young men and women. We can't run around here all day and night. We say no, that's enough. The gang threatening the neighborhood is part of the Vive Ensemble coalition, which has already taken control of many other areas. Capital gangs control 85% of the capital and continuously target previously peaceful communities to try and gain control of even more territories. The Rwanda-backed M23 rebels pushed further into eastern Congo on Wednesday, advancing into the outskirts of Walikale, just 1 day after the presidents of Congo and Rwanda called for an immediate ceasefire. Residents reported hearing gunfire near Walikale's Nyabangi neighborhood. Some residents described the sounds of conflict, while an anonymous military source confirmed that the rebels were engaged in combat with both Congolese soldiers and pro-government militias after launching a surprise attack on an army position just outside the town. Walikale, a town with a population of around 15,000 and located in a mineral-rich region, marks the farthest westward point the M23 rebels have reached during their rapid offensive this year. Situated about 125 kilometers northwest of Goma, Congo's largest eastern city, which fell to the rebels in January, Walikale places the M23 fighters within 400 kilometers of Kisangani, the country's fourth largest city.
Australia is looking to boost the protection of its vast coastline by arming its soldiers with anti-ship missiles and advanced targeting radars. Now, this comes on the heels of 3 Chinese warships taking part in live fire drills off the eastern coast of Australia. Now, the ships passed about 200 miles from Sydney and then moved through international waters for weeks. For more on this topic, let's bring in Charles Edel. He's the Australia Chair and Senior Advisor of at the Centre for Strategic and International Studies, joining us from Canberra. Good morning to you. It's probably late afternoon over there. But how big of a threat does Australia perceive China to be right now?
Well, the challenge from China is looming large because it comes in the context of the largest buildup by a military since World War II, if not ever, which is what China's been undertaking. What you just referred to, Errol, happened when 3 Chinese warships transited off of Sydney, but made a drive-by of Australia. They circumnavigated all of Australia. And the most concerning aspect of this was they conducted live fire drills with no pre-notification. In fact, the Australian government found out about this because commercial airlines, Virgin Australia, signaled this into the government. More than 50 commercial airlines had to divert. Now, when we step back from this, this is a clear message from the Chinese that they're there, that they are projecting power. This is an unprecedented display of their warships moving further south and was meant to both intimidate, send a message, and announce that they are there on a much more regular basis and probe Australia's reaction.
How else will Australia respond in the long term? We mentioned on the short term some of the drills that they may have their soldiers perform, and how is it increasing its influence overall in the region there?
Yeah, it's a great question. So as the security environment has degraded over the last several years, we've heard from senior Australian officials over the last several years of both parties that Australia now faces the most challenging security environment that it has in multiple decades, possibly extending all the way back to World War II. So what we've seen is simultaneously an effort to double down on its alliance with the United States, the AUKUS Pact, where the United States is going to help Australia acquire, maintain, and field nuclear-powered submarines as part of the answer to this, as indeed is a larger buildup of defense capabilities, in addition to a larger diplomatic presence in the region that's meant to counter the more harmful effects of Chinese expansion into the region.
Yeah, we'll continue to watch all the developments here. Charles Edel, thank you so much. Joining us from Australia, 10:36 in the evening. That's not a live picture behind you for any viewers who might get confused. Thank you very much for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Is China preparing for a war in space? Do we have to prepare for an off-planet conflict next? We ask this because of a claim made by a top U.S. Space Force official. General Michelle Guttlin, the Vice Chief of Space Operations, told a conference in Washington that China has been observed conducting coordinated maneuvers with its satellites, describing it as dogfighting in space. To put it simply, he says that Chinese satellites are practicing combat in space. According to him, if this is indeed the case, then China's capability gap with the U.S. has just narrowed. And what does that mean for the future of space dominance? According to General Guttlin, the U.S. Space Force has identified 5 different objects in space maneuvering in and around each other with astonishing synchronicity and control. He said, and I'm quoting him, "That's what we call dogfighting in space. They are practicing tactics, techniques and procedures to conduct on-orbit operations from one satellite to another," unquote. While the top U.S. general did not name the actors involved in these maneuvers, it was later confirmed that the satellites in question were indeed Chinese, specifically 3 Xi'an 240 experimental satellites and 2 Shijian 605A-B experimental space objects. They reportedly carried out a series of proximity operations in lower Earth orbit. In 2024, General Guttlin had said that the Chinese Shijian 605 group, launched in 2021, is meant to detect the space environment and test new technologies. Meanwhile, the Xi'an 24C satellite, launched 2 years later, focused on space science and technology experiments. Now, the next question that comes to mind is, what could be the agenda behind these advanced operations? Remember, a dogfight typically involves fighter jets engaged in tight aerial combat, executing intricate maneuvers. But in space, which is a vacuum, movement means something radically different. The absence of atmosphere and friction means that spacecraft must expel mass to create thrust to make swift movements. And to achieve such a capability is incredibly costly and challenging. And so, if China has been able to achieve this, it would be a big feat. This is also the first time that multiple Chinese satellites have reportedly been observed carrying out synchronized movements. Yes, China has carried out many rendezvous proximity operations, where spacecraft move closer to each other and interact in space. There have also been reports of Chinese satellites approaching and also stalking American space assets. It begs the question, have we underestimated China's ambition in space? What is really happening behind these seemingly harmless activities? It's hard to know at this point of time. What is certain is that According to U.S. Space Force, China and Russia are rapidly closing the gap and endangering U.S. space superiority. General Gutlin referred an example from 2019 when a Russian satellite released a smaller spacecraft to allegedly spy on an American probe. He further enlisted other growing threats to U.S. space platforms, including satellites equipped with robotic arms capable of capturing or holding another satellite hostage. Well, these abilities that Chinese vehicles have demonstrated on multiple occasions. If these claims are indeed true, how long until we face direct confrontation in the stars? In the age of space as a frontier for exploration, transforming into one of tactical warfare. We don't have the answers to these questions right now. What we do know is that the stakes have never been higher. It's not just their defense budgets that are being strengthened. The threat of Russia and America's pressure on Europe to defend itself is now being felt in various ways. Poland and the Baltic states are fortifying NATO's eastern front against Russia. According to the latest reports, Poland may convert its eastern border with Russia into a mini field. This as it withdraws from the Ottawa Convention, which bans anti-personnel landmines. Warsaw is citing the threat of Russian aggression as the reason for this move. Here's why this matters. Poland's decision to withdraw from the treaty highlights growing concerns in Europe about Russian aggression. And so this is just one of the many recent steps taken by Warsaw to prepare for a possible conflict with Moscow. Well, Warsaw is gearing up for World War III by planning to distribute survival guides by the end of the year. It has also been constructing an East Shield, which has been described by Polish lawmakers as the largest operation to strengthen Poland's eastern border and NATO's eastern flank since 1945. In an interview with Polish news outlet on March 18th, when asked about Poland's decision to terminate the treaty, the deputy head of Poland's Ministry of National Defense said, and I quote, "We have no choice. So the situation on the border is serious." I'm referring to the Polish-Belarusian and Polish-Russian borders. This will be one of the elements of the East Shield. He said that Warsaw has concerns that neighboring Belarus will be used by Russia to unleash an attack on Poland. He said that while Poland currently does not have anti-personnel mines, they do have the capabilities to manufacture them. But Poland is not alone. Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia have announced that they would withdraw from the treaty banning landmines soon. Well, the treaty that bans landmines is the Ottawa Treaty. It is an international agreement that was signed in 1997 and has been ratified by more than 160 nations. In withdrawing from it, Poland and the Baltic countries can begin stockpiling and using landmines for the first time in nearly 30 years. In a joint statement, the country's defense ministry said that military threats to NATO member states bordering Russia and Belarus have majorly increased, and so they are prepared to defend their security needs. Poland's decision to begin using landmines comes in the wake of the attacks between Russia and Ukraine amid peace negotiations. Even though Russian President Vladimir Putin and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky have agreed to a ceasefire on attacks against energy infrastructure, Kiev and Moscow have accused each other of violating the temporary truce. How will then Russia respond to Poland's decision to resume using landmines? Well, that we'll have to wait and watch.
Uganda has boosted its military presence in South Sudan by sending additional troops to reinforce its special forces already on the ground. This isn't the first time Uganda has stepped in. Troops were previously sent in 2013 and 16 to back President Kiir's government against Vice President Riek Machar's rebel forces. According to Uganda's military, the current deployment follows a direct request by South Sudan President Salva Kiir seeking assistance to restore peace.
It is a joint mission. We are playing a support role, but really the lead formations are the government of South Sudan, army and security forces. We are giving them some backup role, and it is perfectly in order.
However, the move has drawn sharp criticism from the South Sudan's opposition, who accuse the Kampala's government of interfering with the peace process. There are reports of airstrikes allegedly carried out by both Ugandan and South Sudan forces in Nasir, in the Upper Nile state. The battle for control of the area has intensified, with White Army, a Nur youth militia linked to First Vice President Machar, overrunning the government positions, further escalating tensions.
Our intervention has probably saved lives, hundreds and thousands of lives, and probably saved the economy. We have been there before. In 2013, we saw what happened. There was fighting, and it went on for another 5 or so years. Almost 500,000 people were killed, and a lot of property was destroyed. People were displaced in their millions. It would not be in anyone's interest for this cycle of violence to happen again like it did in the past.
Dozens are reported injured in the airstrikes, and fears of an all-out war continue to mount. The Ugandan military maintains that the situation is returning to normal, and its forces will remain in South Sudan to protect key government installations, including the airports. Isabel Nakiria, CGTN.
Explosions light up the night sky over Yemen. Air raid sirens wail across Israel. US President Donald Trump has issued a chilling ultimatum. Total destruction for the Houthis. As the US intensifies its bombing campaign, the Houthis have fired yet another missile at Israel, sending millions of civilians racing for shelter. The war in West Asia is spiraling into dangerous new territory. Our next report telling you more.
American warplanes are relentlessly pounding Houthi-controlled areas in Yemen. Fighter jets scream overhead, unleashing precision strikes, targeting training camps, weapons depots, and command centers. The US says the offensive is meant to cripple the Iran-backed group's ability to disrupt commercial shipping in the Red Sea. On the ground, Sana'a burns. Entire neighborhoods reduced to rubble. Rescue workers are digging through debris, searching for survivors.
American, Zionist, British, the triad of evil. We will not submit, we will not tire, and we will not give up. We stand with our leader, Sayyid Abdul Malik Badruddin al-Houthi.
Posting on his Truth Social platform, Donald Trump issued his starkest warning yet to Yemen's Houthis rebels, threatening total annihilation. Claiming the US has inflicted tremendous damage, Trump vows that the Houthi rebels will be completely wiped out if their attacks continue. The US president bluntly warns that Iran must stop supplying the Houthis immediately. But the Houthis remain unshaken. The Israel Defense Forces say they intercepted a missile fired from Yemen before it entered Israeli airspace. The Iran-backed group promptly claimed responsibility, marking its second strike against Israel this week. The incoming projectile triggered alert sirens across central Israel at 4 a.m., forcing thousands to seek emergency shelter. Trump warns that he will hold Iran responsible for any attacks carried out by the Houthis, who are part of Iran's axis of resistance against the US and Israel. Iran has condemned the latest US strikes on Yemen and calls them, along with Israel's deadly strikes on Gaza, war crimes.
The events in Yemen are the same. This attack on the people of Yemen, on Yemeni civilians, is also a crime that must be stopped.
In a dangerous cycle of escalation that shows no signs of abating. As the American forces continue to target Yemen with waves of strikes. Since Saturday, the Houthis have vowed to escalate their attacks, particularly against Israel.
این حمله به مردم یمن، به غیر نظامیان یمنی، این هم یک جنایته که باعثی حتما جلو اون گرفته بشه. حمله مجدد رژیم غاصب صهیونیستی به غزه یک جنایت بسیار بزرگ و فاجعه آفرینه. امت اسلامی یک پارچه باید در مقابل این بایستن.